So why is the bull market multiplier broken? That's what everyone wants to understand. Why is the price going down? If we have an ETF, if all this capital is coming in, what's going on here? Why is Bitcoin not going up in the way that I said it would, in the way that other people thought it would? What's happening? And that's what this video is about. This video is a review of my thoughts on what went wrong in the market, so to say, and what you should do about it. Why the price isn't moving up, what happened on ETF launch, etc., etc. So there's a few things here. Now, I want to evaluate where I was wrong because, since starting my YouTube channel, I've been, and even on Twitter, I've been right on a lot of stuff last year. Right, I was right about the BlackRock. As soon as they filed, I said this is going to get approved, and they got approved. I was right about the ESG narrative shift that started in a big way. 2 weeks after I said it, KPMG came out and put out its Bitcoin is positive for the environment report, and many different things along the way. Like the fee wars, for example, right? Like the way these institutions would market Bitcoin now that they have an ETF. A lot of this stuff that I've been right on, and then we got to like days before the ETFs actually launching, and I made two predictions about the first week after launch, and they're completely wrong, right? They're completely wrong. Now, as far as I'm concerned, I'm pretty heavily, outweighing the being wrong side with the amount of being right side. But I normally like to do this. When I get something wrong, I want to evaluate why I got it wrong, what I didn't see in the market, and what I could do better for the next time. So, and I just want to walk you through my thought process on that. This is more of a conversation, really, about what I think happened in the market. And so we can go through that and actually go through what happened. The first thing I want you to realize is that Bitcoin has monumentally changed at this point. As an ETF offering, it is a completely different asset to what it was before the ETF offering. The ETF completely and utterly changes the viability of Bitcoin for hundreds of trillions of dollars of capital, and also hundreds of thousands of people who are actually making the decision for that capital. So the ETF is absolutely huge. Again, I was right when I said, on the 28th of December, I released a video saying this MSTR premium doesn't make sense to me. 2 days later, it started dropping. 2 weeks later, it was down 35%, exactly the premium that I said it would be, right? So it's like there's a lot of stuff in the underbelly of the market here that's going on that I think retail needs to understand, because if you're just looking at price, trying to make sense of what's going on, it's not really going to make sense, because you would have thought if the ETF gets approved, all this demand comes in, therefore the price should be going up, but that's not what's happening. So again, this is one of the reasons why I would love for you to subscribe, because I think this is what needs to happen. We need to get people understanding what's happening in the underbelly of the market, and the time is running out. Time is running out because I believe that by the end of this year, the average person, like no matter how upper average you want to talk about, is going to be completely out of options for buying one Bitcoin. So I want to get this message out to as many people as fast as possible. So, and you subscribing, helping me spank the YouTube algorithm, is helpful in doing that, and sharing the video to people that are worried about the price and understanding what's going on. So let's talk about what happened. There was a couple of things that I said. Some people asked me like, okay, what do you think is going to happen to price after approval? And there's a video that I did, and I said, I think what's going to happen is we're going to see an approval, and then we're going to see trading a month later. And in that time period, I said that we would see a jump and then a major dip on approval, and then we would slowly build up to the trading day as the shorts lifted off, and then we would take off. What I didn't estimate and what I didn't think about was the fact that, the SEC and all these institutions were basically going to wait until trading day finishes, approve the ETFs, and before trading day starts the next day, start trading them. That was unexpected in my calculations up until the very last days, because I've never seen it, right? No, I don't think anyone has ever seen that sort of situation where this much of a hyped ETF and a hyped investment product, you can just basically approve it and start trading the very next trading session. So that was certainly miscalculation on my side. I should have paid more. I should have put more emphasis into that, because ultimately the sell the news event happened. It just happened like on trading, because trading was literally the session after approval. So that one thing I didn't take into consideration. I didn't take into consideration how many people would have been front running the approval decision since BlackRock applied for it. So if you look at the date when BlackRock applied versus the approval date, if you had bought Bitcoin on the day that BlackRock applied and sold it when the approval happened, you're looking at a 75% return, which is huge for traders, right? So traders were part of the downswing on the day of launch as well. And in addition to that, I wasn't expecting the amount and the ferocity of GBTC outflows that we've seen. And then on top of that, so I was expecting like a couple $100 million a day to flow out of GBTC. And if that was the case, the price would be exactly the same. But what we're seeing is $500 million a day being dumped into the market for a market that was pretty stable, with around $30 to $40 million worth of day purchasing going per day worth of purchasing going on. So of course, if you dump $500 million onto the market every single day, the price is going to take a dip, right? This is what you call we've had an onslaught of selling here, and it doesn't look like it's going to stop anytime soon, right? That's the one key thing that I don't want to say anytime soon. I think it's going to take a couple weeks to slow down. And remember, the two predictions that I made here were, number one, this is like on approval. So number one, we would see $3.5 billion worth of net inflows into Bitcoin in the first week after approval. And if that happened, then we would see a price of 57 to 62K based on the bull market multiplier. Those are my first week trading predictions for the ETF. So we got a bunch of selling going on from the people who were lining up to take profits. We got a bunch of sell the news stuff going on because the ETF was trading the day after approval, which is not, in my experience, not normal. And then in addition to that, Bloomberg put out a report basically saying that roughly they estimate only 30% of the capital coming out of GBTC is finding its way into other Bitcoin exposures at this point in time. And now that makes sense to me because, again, it's not a good thing that 70% of the capital coming out of GBTC is not going back into Bitcoin, right? That's not a good thing. But it makes sense because if you were trying to, let's say you were holding on to GBTC for such a long time and then you sold it and then you started seeing the market tank, wouldn't you just say, hey, let me wait a week and see what happens? I've already made so much money. Let me wait a week and see what happens to the price, and maybe I can get in at a better price rather than just reconverting it right now, right? Wouldn't you do that? I would do the exact same thing. So in essence, and then on top of that, there were rumors that, the FTX that owned a bunch of GBTC had to sell, their estate had to sell. And there was also a rumor that that DCG, the parent company of GBTC, also had to sell. And so there is a lot of speculation around who's selling, but ultimately what's happened is that there's $500 million a day worth of selling coming out of GBTC, and the other funds are doing what they can to suck it up. The disadvantage here of a cash creates versus an in-kind fund is what's happening, right? Because with a cash creates and a cash redeem fund, instead of actually just moving the Bitcoin. So with an in-kind, what you can do, right, is like, I have these shares, I'm going to exchange them in kind for the Bitcoin. And you can just send a notice to Grayscale and say, hey, I want to move my Bitcoin to BlackRock. And the institutional asset managers will do the move. And therefore, no Bitcoin actually hits the market. The Bitcoin just gets moved from one custodian to the other. So that's obviously the best way of doing it. But the cash creates method basically means that Grayscale has to dump that Bitcoin onto the market, And then as they do that, the market basically starts tanking. And then that capital has to come out of Grayscale. So it might take, a day to do that, depending on how fast you're selling or whatever. And then you got to inject that capital into BlackRock. Now, the problem is that they work on a T+1, T+2 settlement basis, which means that if I put in capital on a Monday, some of these funds might not be buying or executing that capital into the market to buy Bitcoin until Wednesday. And so you've got that issue coming in and alongside all of the other issues. And so really, ultimately, what we've seen is a $500 million a day dump onto the Bitcoin markets, with only 30% of that, apparently, based on what Bloomberg is saying, only 30% of that being pushed back into Bitcoin exposures, which means you've got up to 70% that's actually net selling into the market. Now, I actually think it's probably lower than that. I think maybe somewhere in the region of 40 to 50% is finding its way back into other funds. But the key point here is that there's an overwhelming amount of selling going on versus the amount of buying. And again, I want to highlight, like, these are things that I was not expecting. I was not expecting for there to be, trading on the ETF, like literally with zero time delay, right? I was expecting for there to be a sell the news event. It just happened to be a sell the launch event, sell the trading day event rather than a sell the news event. And I wasn't expecting the onslaught of GBTC selling going on. And I think that I've spoken to a lot of investors, big investors in GBTC, like myself, and others that I know who have way more GBTC than I do. And a lot of them are not actually selling because of the tax liability that they're facing on their accounts, which makes me think that the people who are selling have to sell because they're trying to generate some liquidity for something, which makes me lean towards it is institutions like DCG, FTX, that have to sell their positions in order to liquidate, and people who were front running it. Because, Bitcoin went up 100% just in the front running process of this ETF, right? So now that it's gone down a few percentage points, it's not really worth worrying about, but it has been front running this ETF. All of this buying that happened before, the BlackRock pump happened from June of last year up until the ETF, right? And now more capital has to go in. But yeah, this is what's happening, and the bull market multiplier works in reverse. The bull market multiplier, basically, if you've watched any of my videos on that, it works on the net inflows or the net outflows. And what we've seen here is net outflows. Now, the positive thing here is that this will subside, because whoever is selling GBTC is not going to forever sell GBTC. Right? I don't think that's going to happen. I also think there's probably conversations going on inside of Grayscale about lowering the fee at a certain point. Right? I think that is probably a very, very common conversation that's happening in the offices of Grayscale on a daily basis. The selling pressure will subside, because that's how markets work. At some point, sellers get exhausted. And I want to highlight, I think that Bitcoin is doing phenomenally well in the face of $500 million a day worth of selling pressure. I think they're doing phenomenally. I think Bitcoin's doing phenomenally well. We should be sitting much lower than where we're at right now if this was a normal market with $500 million a day worth of selling pressure in a market that was only taking $30 million a day to stay stable. So I think Bitcoin's doing extremely well. I think that the selling pressure that's come into the market, it has been overwhelming. And I think at some point it ends. I think in this week you will start seeing the selling pressure from GBTC lift off. I think it will come down to $200 to $300 million a day. And I think that's important for GBTC to do that, to send the message that people are not, flighting from GBTC. They're just basically selling because they had to, right? They had to generate liquidity. They had to raise capital, whatever it is, they had to. It also sort of highlights here, which is quite important, because these ETFs are sucking up 10,000 Bitcoin a day. Remember that if the 10,000 Bitcoin is coming out of GBTC and it's being sucked up by all these other funds, the new buyers of those funds are not going to be the same lettuce, weak-handed people that were in GBTC. And therefore, this rotation of buyer that I've been talking about, this change of new buyer that I've been talking about for months now, is starting to take effect, because the Bitcoin that's sitting in the BlackRock fund and the Fidelity fund is never going to see the light of day again, because it's not the speculators, the traders, the DCG parent company or FTX or whoever else. It's not them. These are people net buying. I also think, one of the things that I was wrong on was the way that BlackRock and Fidelity would implement the capital that they have sitting on the sidelines. I don't think there's a lot of capital on the sidelines that has actually been executed yet. I actually think what's going on is they've got their $1 to $2 billion or whatever it is sitting on the sidelines, and they're drip feeding 100 million, 200 million into it. But really what they wanted to do was generate some marketing, and they've done that. Within a few days, they're up to $1 billion of AUM, and by the way, this Bitcoin ETF is one of the most successful asset class launches of an ETF, if not the most successful. So if I was them, what I would do is I'd allow the bleed from GBTC to put capital in my fund, get all the marketing for the first week. And then once the bleed slowed down and I can see that the price has sort of hit a bottom, then start putting in the capital that I actually had on the sidelines and allocate it to the fund. So I get the marketing of, we got to $1 billion in whatever, 5-6 trading sessions. And then the next week I can create that momentum. And really, we saw that Eric from Bloomberg and James from Bloomberg highlighted that the volumes actually kicked up into the end of last week, which is not normal for an ETF with this much hype, which means that there's a lot more interest than we think. So overall, those were the things that I got wrong. I got wrong by the fact that it was, it started trading the very next trading session. I wasn't expecting that. I wasn't expecting for the GBTC bleed to be this high, but it is, and that's okay. There's a lot of profit taking. We've had a large pump of Bitcoin from the BlackRock application to now. But all of everything else that I've stated has been correct. So I think I'd probably, I don't know, what grade would you give me? Give me a grade in the comments of the predictions since last August when I started my channel. I think it's been pretty good. I should have seen the possibility of trading the next day. That's one thing I should have seen. I should have seen that there was a higher possibility of the GBTC bleed coming in, and I should have seen that it would have taken a little bit of time for these funds to start putting in the capital that they said that they had on the sidelines. Those are the three things that I will take away as lessons for myself going into the future. Luckily, asset classes don't get born every single day, so next time this happens, I will be well prepared. But overall, this is a fantastic launch for ETFs. It's a fantastic launch for Bitcoin. There's thousands of Bitcoin every day being hoovered up. I think that there will be, just these ETFs alone will buy all of the daily mine supply of Bitcoin over the next few years. And if they do that, the equilibrium price is the most important thing. It's how much capital is coming in and how much Bitcoin is available to buy, and what does the price need to be in order to maintain the status quo. That is the most important metric that an investor should be looking at. And if we're looking at $150 to $200 million of daily purchasing after this selling sludge has been taken care of, you're looking at an equilibrium price of over $150,000 just to keep the price of the market stable. So that's what I'm looking for. I'm waiting for the selling sludge to end, and I will leave you with another prediction. If you would give me the grace, what I would like to say is that the predictions that I made the days before the ETF approval, which is $3.5 billion in net inflows. By the way, I think we got to like $1.2, $1.3 billion in net inflows. I said $3.5 billion in net inflows, and if that happens, a price of 57 to 62K, I think with the amount of selling pressure that's going on, I'd be comfortable in saying that we will see the $3.5 billion worth of net inflow by the halving, right? Latest by the halving. I would like to say March, but I'm being a bit more conservative. I think by the halving, we'll see that $3.5 billion, and I think the price trends upwards as a result of that. A lot of people will say that there's a dip before the halving, etc., etc., and I think we just had it. I don't know. I'm not a trader. I've never been a trader, which is why, like, most of my predictions are based on, okay, strategically what's happening in the market, and they're the ones that are correct. Every time I make any short-term trading sort of style predictions, it always never works out. So I'm not a trader, but overall, I think that my predictions are correct. I think the timeline was wrong. So that's what I would say. And if you can give me the grace of pushing it out for a couple months, I think you'll see exactly what I've been saying. The moment this selling pressure is over, you're going to see fireworks in this space, because there is not enough Bitcoin sitting on the sidelines, which means it's harder and harder for you to get your one Bitcoin. And I believe my message is over this year. I believe my message becomes irrelevant for the majority of people, and then it basically is only relevant for millionaires, US dollar millionaires, by the end of this year. Because if Bitcoin is over $100,000 at some point this year, even if it's at the all-time high of 69, you probably need around 300,000 of liquidity to, if you're an asset allocator, if you're a normal, father, mother, etc., lawyer, you're allocating capital, you're not a trader, you're not a risk analyst. I think you need about $300,000 of spare liquidity to make that investment decision. And not a lot of people have that. Basically, it's going to be millionaires or multimillionaires that have 300,000 of liquidity to make a $70,000 to $100,000 allocation. So my message is becoming irrelevant. And my message is very simple. You need to get to one Bitcoin right fucking now, because it is the fee war itself was 5 years ahead of where I thought it would be. You've got being able to buy Bitcoin at 0.2%, half of what you can buy GLD for. It's unbelievable. So a lot of positive has happened here. Do not just try and listen to the price and go, okay, this is what the future of Bitcoin is, because the price today is what it is. That's not how it works. The price today is reflecting the dumping of Bitcoin onto the markets. And yeah, we'll see how long this GBTC bleed lasts. But I think if you could give me the grace and allow me to extend my two predictions, the two predictions that I got wrong, out for a couple months, I think we'll all be pretty happy. But ultimately, despite all of that, there are still always only 3 rules to Bitcoin. Step number 1, you buy Bitcoin. Step number 2, shut the fuck up. And step number 3, you get fabulously wealthy.